But you know what? You know what I also realized though? I'm looking around that college class, and I went to college a little bit later in life. I was like 32, right? So I had a wife, 3 kids, a mortgage. I've been to combat twice. Like I'm not here for the college experience. I'm trying to get this crap over with as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But I'm looking around in a classroom with 20 other students in it, and most of them are a lot younger than me. And when they get fed this stuff, they're like, "Oh wow, that's really interesting." Nope, it's stupid. I'm sorry.
Buddy, there's your famous mug.
Yeah.
You're just a breath of fresh air. And you know what's funny is that when a couple people, including my ex, found out that you were my friend, that I was going to do a podcast with you, they all lost their minds. So I don't know what you're doing, but you're a classic example of a guy who just kind of speaks the truth with humor, much needed on the, let's call it the right of center spectrum. And always getting your point across with humor. But I've also seen when you're standing there talking about what really matters, when you're in the legislature, and that's what's great. So
I appreciate it. By the way, how's your little one?
Well, people should know that Nick came to LA to do a podcast with me. We were driving to the studio. My wife calls me and says, "I think I'm going in labor," and I say, "All right, well, I'm going to do the podcast. I'll come back." And I basically hang up, and Nick is like, "Dude, real talk? She's going into labor. We can do this another time." I go, "Nick, you came all the way to LA. It's not happening. We gotta get it. It'll be fine. I've been through this two other times."
Brian was just fighting for equality, right?
That's what I was doing. Drive yourself. And at one point she said something to me. She goes, "I think I'm going to drive myself to the hospital." And then you took your glasses off. I don't know if you remember this. You took your glasses off and the Green Beret and you came out and you went, "Dude, you got to go. If she has that baby in the car alone, you will never forgive yourself." And I went, "I think you've got a point here." And I called her and I said, "I'm coming home." Then that was a false alarm. And
I think you're giving me a little bit too much credit here.
Well, she said she was going to labor, so that's legit.
Yeah. But I mean, like you were looking at me and it's like, this is like the guy code thing.
Yeah.
Where like, you know what you got to do, but it's the other guy's job. And you're trying to, and this is a guy code thing that I think women would hear this conversation and be like, "What the hell is wrong with you guys?" Guys are like, "Okay, I have 2 obligations. Is there any way I can meet both of them? Is there any way I can meet both obligations?"
There you go. It's exactly right.
Right. And you know which one you're gonna sacrifice, right? You're gonna go to your wife. Right? You're gonna do that.
Of course.
But then guy code is I'm supposed to come in and be like, "Dude, no, like, yeah, hey, no, shut up, another time. We'll do it. We'll be fine." Right.
Exactly.
That's guy code working the way it's intended.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned guy code, and even saying that in some circles would be considered triggering. And I think I'd love you to talk about this because you're kind of on the front lines in many ways. I really do think that in some ways we're living in chaos. And what I mean by that is that categories and definitions seem to have been dashed to the rocks. So you've got this kid who just won, this boy, this young man who won this race in Connecticut and is being, and then you could hear people booing, but also people cheering for, I think it's in Connecticut, for this quote unquote girl who won this race. All of us know that's insane, that biological men shouldn't be in women's sports. Are these the exceptions? And am I making a mountain out of a molehill? What do you think? Talk to me about that.
If we were, no, we're not. And I think the reason why is because the thing you have to look for is what is power praising? And when you look at like major culturally shaping institutions within our society, whether it's the media, Hollywood, higher ed, politics, whatever, if you look at what these institutions are predominantly praising, they're praising a boy pretending to be a girl to go compete with girls and then to essentially dominate those sports. And they're saying, no, you're supposed to completely ignore everything that you see, that you've known through personal experience or whatnot.
Well, mammalian biology, really. Mammalian biology.
You're supposed to ignore it all in favor of the new orthodoxy. And the new orthodoxy is that is stunning and brave. And if you don't think so, you're a bigot. And no, that's insane. And yeah, if this was a one-off thing happening at some random school in Connecticut where everybody's universally looking at this going, what the hell's wrong with you? That would be one thing, but that's not what's happening. We're being told that there's something wrong with us if we don't celebrate that as, again, being stunning and brave. No, that's insane.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's how it feels. That's what I was kind of trying to say. But you used an expression there, which was, what is it? What did you say about it being culturally, just the idea that we're
culturally shaping institutions.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why it feels so much like propaganda, I think. There's this amazing author. His pen name is Theodore Dalrymple. He wrote the book Life at the Bottom. And it was from his experience. And again, this is not like some like hardcore, the guy grew up, his dad was a communist. He's an atheist. He worked as I think a psychologist in Africa, and then again within the British hospital and prison system. And his book is all about just interviewing, some of the people he interviewed and the things that he discovered. But he has this quote about propaganda. And he says that the more he studied communist propaganda, the more he came to the conclusion that it was not meant to inform, it was meant to intimidate and humiliate. And so therefore, the less it corresponded to reality, the more effective it was. And his conclusion is that because if you can get people to admit to things or remain silent about things that they know are obviously false, and then later essentially repeat the things that they know are obviously false, you essentially make them a party to evil. And a nation of emasculated liars is easy to control.
Wow.
And I remember listening to this guy, and I just butchered his quote, right? He said it so much more eloquent than I did. And his real name, I think it's Dr. Anthony Daniels. But his pen name's Theodore Dalrymple. And he describes, and he did that quote years ago. But I always remember that when I see people trying to get me to go along with things or say things or either intimidate or shame me into agreeing with something that is just so obviously wrong.
Yeah, I always try to read my enemies or people I disagree with, right? So I've read I've read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. That guy's the biggest lightweight on the planet. Robin DiAngelo's, what is it called? White Fragility.
White Fragility.
I've read everyone who is on the other side. I also read the critical race theorists. There are two things that I noticed. With the critical race theorists, it's not that critical race theory doesn't have some merit, scholarly merit, in the sense that there are different kinds of prejudice, maybe even racism, that apply to different groups. So a black woman with 3 children and no man in the house has a very different consideration. She needs good daycare and things like that because she's holding down 2 jobs than, say, a black man in his 20s who doesn't have any dependents. He's got a different thing. He's over there stuffing envelopes at the NAACP or something like that. So there's some really interesting... there's some
intersectional
components. However, when you read when you read this stuff, what they're really advocating, if you read, and it's not even, you don't even have to read between the lines. At the end of the day, what they're really advocating is that if you are part of the American system, you are automatically a white supremacist, because you are supporting a white power structure. Therefore, the only way to make the world more equal is to what? Tear it down. And you got to tear it down. That's the first thing. So you'll see a lot of this stuff that makes no sense. And I think that's deliberate because you want to, what you're really looking for is destruction. That's what a revolutionary does. And then let's rebuild it in our Marxist image. That's the first thing. Then I read people like Ibram Kendi and I read Robin DiAngelo, people like that, lightweights, who never put themselves in the public arena, would never dare really debate anybody. They just have to, they'd sit in their little, especially Ibram Kendi. That guy makes a fortune, grifter, telling corporations how racist they are. Hilarious. And so, what they have a very, very binary look at the, unnuanced way of looking at the world. Victim, oppressor, power, powerless, racist, non-racist, or anti-racist. That's it. So to me, they just break the world down into good guys, bad guys.
I had this one experience in the General Assembly that was actually pretty formative for me. It was several years back, And I was so tired of the every time I don't agree with you, I'm a sexist, I'm a racist, I'm a bigot. It's like, weren't we just talking about marginal tax rates? Like, how am I,
Yeah.
how am I this horrible, evil person because I want to lower taxes for everybody, by the way. It's not like I had a carve out like just the Caucasians, right? That's not what I was doing. But I listened to this one of my colleagues. She got up and she told a story, and it was when that movie The Green Book came out. And it was, and the whole premise of the Green Book is it's talking about how, especially in Jim Crow states, Black people basically had to have kind of like their own resources to determine what's a safe place to stay, where can you go, like to eat, for lodging, all of these things. And she's describing this story where she gets pulled, and she's talking about how she looked up to her father as just the bravest, strongest man in the world, right? And they get pulled over, and I think she said she was in North Carolina.
This is a Black woman?
Pulled over. Yes. Yeah. Black woman legislator in Virginia. And she talks about getting pulled over, and she said, and you know, it's not like because they were speeding, it's not like anything else. They got pulled over because this is Jim Crow era, and he's in a rural county, and they pull over the car with the family in it, and she goes, I remember my dad being scared, and I'd never seen it before. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I can't relate to that in this sense that I've experienced it, but I can sit here right now and I can appreciate feeling like the anger and the incredible injustice over the idea that my father, who I love, who I respect, who is brave, looks scared. And the reason why he's scared is not because he did something wrong. The reason why he's scared is because, you know, in that era, he's the wrong color in the wrong place at the wrong time.
With no power structure behind him to help him. Yeah.
Exactly,
no representation.
Right? And so I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at that experience. I'm thinking, like, I get why she is pissed. I do. I totally get that. I can sympathize with that as one human being to another. I might not have experienced it, but I've had other experiences in my life that I can relate to that and say, you know what? That's horrible.
Yes.
And that's horribly unjust. And here's what I don't understand. Why can we all universally acknowledge that was horrible, that was bad, that was unjust? It was also dismantled. Right. And it wasn't just dismantled by people that looked like her or looked like me. It was dismantled by a bunch of people that came together and said, this is morally reprehensible. There is a standard for basic humanity that's morally reprehensible. We need to put an end to it. And then we need to make sure it never happens again. Like, that to me is a unifying message that everyone should be able to get behind. But then you fast forward, and I have to listen to other legislators that essentially say that any level of disagreement with their policies, and it could be on taxes, it could be on business regulations, it could be on, you know, just expenditures or whatever it is. If you disagree with them, the only possible motivation you can have is racism.
Yeah. That sounds like a really crude tactic, sort of a cynical tactic to get what they want through.
It's horrible because it undermines. I mean, if you think about everything that was fought for to get us to a place.
You're doing this on the backs of the people that really did suffer, right?
It's this Don Quixote-esque. It's like, you know what Don Quixote proved?
Yes.
Windmills make really poor substitutes for dragons, right?
What a great, it's a quixotic. What a great metaphor. That's exactly right. It's like you guys you're Don Quixote right now. It's important though on that to say this. Like, I think when you read the history of this country as you have and as I have, it is impossible not to be overwhelmed by the ferocious and constant assault on African Americans. It was hard. There is no doubt. It wasn't just Jim Crow. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember, you know, when you were black in New York City, you did not get a cab. You couldn't get a cab. I had to get my friend a cab. You just couldn't get a cab. There are so many things like that. Yeah. And there is no doubt that policing, for the most part, was disproportionate, you know, and we can get into why and stuff like that. But definitely I talk to black dudes who I'm friends with right now, we're like, when I see a cop car, I turn my music down or I put my glasses on. I have fake glasses I put on. These are the kinds of considerations where you go, I've never had to worry about that stuff. So I think it's important for Americans to acknowledge our history and what a great history we have, but also in some ways what a brutal history we have. That doesn't make you unpatriotic. It just makes you honest. Let's take a look at what if you read Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, who I think who never actually met a slave but talked to a lot of ex-slaves. But it's a very powerful indictment on how brutal it was. So it's not that you shouldn't educate yourself. It's not that you shouldn't acknowledge. But I think the larger question is, what does it do for you to continue to sound that horn? We've got to move beyond that. A lot, I think, by the way, I think, to be fair, a lot of African Americans have and continue to. I think this is the other thing. Most of the black people that I think, or black and brown people, let's just use that as an example, are living their lives and doing their thing. And it feels like there's a small group, and a lot of them are white liberals, who are out there going, man, these poor victims, we've got to keep talking. We've got to change other white people to make it safe for black and brown people, which couldn't be more condescending and embarrassing to me.
Well, this just happened this session, this year. So again, we had all kinds of legislation. We had legislation that was increasing the minimum wage. It was taking away exemptions for farm labor. And we were pointing out, okay, well, if you do this, you're going to, and we're already dealing with inflation issues. Now you're going to deal with massive issues with respect to grocery prices. And we got told, if you don't want to get rid of this, it's because you want Jim Crow era laws in place. Like, are you kidding me? That's the only possible consideration for this. But here was the crazy part, right? So if you didn't agree with the exemptions that were in place for agriculture, the only possible explanation is you're a Jim Crow bigot, right? But there was another bill, and I know because I had it, where we were trying to take away some of the, we're trying to institute what they call constitutional carry, which is to say that if you are legally permitted to own a firearm, carry a firearm, then you should be able to carry it discreetly, right? Like you shouldn't have to go through an additional check to be able to carry it in your purse as opposed to carrying it on your hip, because we have open carry in Virginia. And so as we're discussing that, one of the patrons of the bill says, okay, well, if you want to talk about Jim Crow, a lot of these laws that were put in place with respect to concealed carry permits were put in during the Jim Crow era in order to selectively decide who could exercise their constitutionally protected right and who couldn't. And guess what happened? Yeah, Martin Luther King was denied a concealed carry permit.
Wow.
Right? Like, that's insane.
Wow.
And so somebody gets up from one of the organizations that opposes the bill and like, how dare a white person lecture us on Jim Crow? So my colleague, Delegate A.C. Cordoza, who's a black legislator, he said, oh, you want to hear it from somebody that looks like you? Okay, I'm black. They're absolutely right. That was a relic of Jim Crow, right? So what happens? Another delegate, other side of the aisle, female, says, well, this is why we say there's such a thing as skin folk and kin folk. And we're all just sitting there like flabbergasted. It's like, she just called him an Uncle Tom, not because he's black. He has the experience. He has an opinion.
They're not even talking about
the subject
point. Yeah.
Well, because here's what was demonstrated so vividly right there, right? With her making that comment, skin folk and kin folk. It was like, oh, I get it. You only get the privilege of using race, sex, sexual orientation. You only get the privilege of using those things as a platform to speak on something if you agree with leftist ideology.
That's right.
The moment you depart from leftist ideology, you're now a traitor and you don't get any of those benefits. So is this really about race or sex or sexual orientation?
It's ideology.
Or is it really about parroting the narrative with respect to leftist ideology? And that was what was so frustrating to me. It was like, how dare you insult that guy who has his own experience, but since he doesn't agree with your policy, he can now be just discarded like that.
But that's not somebody who's been taught how to think. That's somebody who's been taught what to think. And that's the university's problem. That I can tell you that woman has been waiting to use that line for a long time. She didn't even care what the debate was about. She just knew that this is an example of something I learned in one of those classes I took. And here I am. I'm not really a delegate. I'm an activist. And that's what it sounds like. That's what's so frustrating. And that is, I think, I don't know if that's new, but there is this new left-wing ideology that doesn't even want to debate or talk about the issues. It's walk away, just walk away. And this is what we want to do. Don't engage. And that to me is the enemy. Those people are, they're dangerous.
I gave this one, the first floor speech I ever had where we were having a debate and it kind of went viral. It was on a gun issue. And I remember my colleagues I didn't think I had said anything that horrible, right? I didn't think I had said anything that horrible, but I was upset because for the last 2 days we had been compared to Nazis and terrorists and segregationists. And I was like, this is all about a Second Amendment question. Like, what the hell is going on?
God.
And I got pissed. And I finally said, look, for the people that are going to compare us to segregationists, I just want to point out, it wasn't my side that supported slavery, that fought women's suffrage, that put Japanese in internment camps, that supported Jim Crow, supported mass resistance, that supported segregation. That was your all's party.
Wow.
I said, now look, I recognize that none of you currently sitting here believed in any of those things, but stop projecting the sins of your party onto us every time you want to make a hard point.
Wow.
That resulted, three of them left the floor in tears. And then the entire caucus requested, in tears. Right. And left now keep in mind, I didn't accuse them of doing any of those things. I said, that was your party, not ours.
That burly man was mean to us.
Yeah. So they requested a 15-minute recess. And for the next 3 days on the floor, all I hear is what a horrible human being I am and everything else, except for one guy on the other side of the aisle. One guy on the other side of the aisle, delegate came over, black man. And he knocked on my office door and he goes, Nick, can we talk about what happened on Thursday? And I said, yes, sir, absolutely. He comes in, we sit down and he goes, and he proceeds to explain. He goes, you said this, what did you mean by it? I said, well, I meant this. He goes, okay. When you say this, a lot of times we interpret it this way. I said, I had no idea. That's not because, so for instance, I talked about if you really want to start to solve crime, let's look at the fatherless issue that we have. Let's look at broken homes.
Yeah.
And he goes, when you say that, we heard, oh, you're attacking black. I said, delegate, I grew up in a broken home. He's like, okay, I get it. He goes, why did you say certain things that happened culturally in the 60s? I said, well, I was talking about the sexual revolution and the fact that, that really contributed a lot to this idea of dehumanizing, sex and the traditional family and all of these things that provide a buffer and security so that kids don't end up on the streets or in jail. And he goes, okay, when you say the 60s, we think the civil rights movement, so that's what we thought you were. I said, okay. Here was what was so beautiful about that. It doesn't mean that him and I agreed on the same policies and whatnot, but he took the time to come over to my office and say, Nick, I don't think you're a bad person.
Right.
We might disagree.
What did you mean?
I want to understand what you meant, and I want you to understand why certain things cause us to assume that this is what you mean.
And he educated you.
He did. It was, and I was able to share with him, like, he didn't know I grew up in a broken home.
Right.
He didn't know I could talk from personal experience on some of this stuff. And to this day, if he ever comes over to me and says, hey, Nick, let's talk a little bit about this or that guy has my undivided attention.
Right.
Undivided attention. Right. Why? Because he's an honest broker. He's an honest broker. There's a standard by which we can judge our comments and our policy positions. It's a standard of truth, right? It's based off of objective reality, right? There's objective morality. Some things are inherently good. Some things are inherently bad. We can use logic and reason in order to come to conclusions. And there's a standard by which we can judge both our policies and our methods for advocating for them. But if every time I say something, you're just going to say, oh, that's because you're a white man, or that's because you're privileged, or that's because you're that.
It just stops the debate. It just stops everything.
And it does it on purpose. This is the most important thing to understand about that. For the people that engage in that sort of practice, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, for the people that engage in that practice where I do not have to listen to you because I can now categorize you in a particular area. And now there is no logic, there is no reason, there is no civil discourse, there is no scientific method. The moment those things don't work for my argument, I'm going to blame the patriarchy, or I'm going to blame white supremacy, or I'm going to blame, racist power structures. Well, then what you've essentially told me is that there is no area where we can come together using objective standards that apply to both of us equally.
Well, they don't have ideas. Their ideas can't stand the test of time. Their ideas are not nourished. They just can't stand on their own. That's a classic example of just a parachute. I'm going to pull this patriarchy thing because I don't know how to defend my point of view here. That's really what they do. They go right back to that, victim oppressor narrative right away. And that's how they see the world.
It's the whole, critical theory with postmodernism and all this other stuff. I mean, I love the whole postmodernism thing where it's like, we don't believe in meta narratives. There is no objective truth. Really? Is it true that there is no objective truth? Like these things are so inherently contradictory. And the crazy part is that, again, I thoroughly enjoy sitting down with somebody that has a basic standard of, look, these are the tools that we're going to use in order to have a rational conversation, right? And again, laws of logic, things of that. I love talking with people that have different perspectives, right? When that one legislator gave up and gave that speech and talked about her personal experience, it doesn't mean I might have agreed with some of the policies that she wanted to implement, but I had a much better understanding of where she was coming from as a result of listening to that. And I enjoy that. I enjoy learning and understanding. But the moment someone says, okay, I'm going to use logic all the way up to the point where it helps my argument, and the moment it doesn't, I'm going to jettison it. What you've just told me is that you're putting us on a track. You're putting us on a track for conflict, like violence. Because if there is no mechanism where we can peacefully adjudicate our differences, even if that means I leave you alone and you leave me alone,
right,
then what you're really telling me is that where this ends is you either obey or we're going to have to fight.
That's right.
I mean, that's tragic. I don't want that.
No, they don't want that. That side doesn't want that either.
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm always just flabbergasted by when I hear the left talking about violent revolution. Like, dude, you don't want to do that. Don't wake those dogs up, please, because the people on the other side know how to shoot straight. I don't even like to get into that.
I understand. Like in the last 6 months, I've seen articles where, working out is racist, eating right is racist, going to farmers markets is racist, waking up early is racist.
Then I'm a racist.
And I just got to ask the question, how do you plan to globalize the intifada with a bunch of gender confused obese people that can't wake up on time? That doesn't make the best foot soldiers.
Well, yeah. Can you talk to us a little bit about, I think most people are really ignorant to how government actually works. And I think it's important.
Oh gosh.
Nobody really understands. Everybody should be forced to take a civics class, because I think most people don't understand the nitty gritty. And so can you take us through how a law gets passed? I mean,
sure.
My guess is a bill is introduced by...
the schoolhouse rock, right?
Okay.
So the schoolhouse rock, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill, but I want to be a law someday. So how does that process work? So we actually, just as kind of a joke here, we actually talked about redoing schoolhouse rock to explain how it really works. Like, I'm just a bill and I want to be a law, but I pissed off the chair of appropriations committee and now I'm going to die in a subcommittee. Like that's the reality.
Yeah.
But typically this is what people need to understand, because I don't think people understand how many steps something has to go through. Because obviously, in like, we'll say Virginia, because Virginia reflects the United States Congress very similarly, but we have a House, we have a Senate. A House member or a Senate member, they can both submit a bill. That bill generally what happens is a bill goes to the committee that it's intended for. So for instance, if I got a bill on farming, it's going to go to a committee in agriculture. And then agriculture is going to look at that bill and it's going to send it to a subcommittee. Now, what most people don't know is that probably 60 to 70% of your bills, like on a state level, they die in a subcommittee. Which means like maybe 9 legislators saw it. Okay. And that's not nefarious. That's not evil or bad. All that is like, look, in most of your state legislatures, you have what is called a citizen legislature, which means we're not full-time legislators in the sense that we're constantly going back to the state capitol and looking at bills. In Virginia, we go in for 60 days on even days and 45 on odd. And a lot of other states operate, similarly. So it's part-time. Right? Part-time legislature. We're going to see 2,000 to 2,500 bills in a 60-day period. So we've got to have this committee process.
Wow.
And you've got to allow people an opportunity. And we're doing that in like 8 weeks, right? So you got to have this process where people are able to kind of specialize within a particular field. And so, for instance, I serve on public safety, or I have served on public safety. I've served on finance. I've served on education committee. And the longer you serve on these committees, the more familiar you are with kind of like the processes and the nuance of legislation as it comes up, the various organizations it's going to affect, all of those things. So I submit a bill. It gets posted through the clerk's office. It gets assigned to a committee. I then show up on my day at subcommittee, and I've got, I'm there to basically argue in favor of my bill. And this is my opportunity to bring people to come and testify. It's other people's opportunity to come and testify in opposition to the bill. Sometimes, like in ours, people can testify online. And depending on how controversial the bill is, this could be a 30-minute process. It could be a 3-minute process. So if you got a bill where you're naming a freeway, right?
Yeah.
You can be in and out. It goes to the House floor. It passes the House. It goes over to the Senate. It passes the Senate. And then it goes to the governor's desk, right? But that's the process. It goes from a subcommittee to a full committee on the House side. Then that bill, once we all approve it on the House, it goes over to the Senate. Then it goes to a subcommittee and then a committee on the Senate side. And if they change it, now it's got to come back and we got to look at the changes. Do you want to accept the changes? Do you not want to accept the changes? Once it makes it through that process, then it goes to the governor, or on the federal level, it'd go to the president, and he has a certain amount of time to sign it, and only then does it actually become law.
I love it. I love that process. It's all those checks and balances. It's a slow, laborious process that was put in place by the founding fathers because that's how it should be. Government should be slow. It should be, it should grind instead of, right? I mean, that would be the idea to give people time. Yeah.
Whenever people are like, well, here's the other thing. I get asked this a lot, and I try not to be flippant, right? But people say, why can't politicians just come together and do what's best for we the people?
You don't want that.
I'm like, because we don't agree on what's best for we the people, right? We have disagreements on that. Yeah. And the government is not some like nice little altruistic club where we just make casual suggestions to people. We're the only entity within a free society that has the legal authority to use aggressive force to get what we want. That's why anytime a politician says, all we're asking, you ain't asking for crap, dude.
Right.
You pass that as a law, guys with guns are showing up to make sure it gets imposed.
That's right. That's right. So can you tell us about so when you have a bill like the healthcare bill, the Obamacare, which is 1,400 pages or some crazy amount. Yeah. Nobody's reading that bill. How does that happen? How does that massive book
so here's where it gets crazy, especially at the federal level. So what I described was the way the process is supposed to work. The way the process often works is, you need to understand that leadership has a ton of power. If you are the Speaker of the House, you decide who sits on all these committees, right? You decide who the committee chairs are.
Okay.
You have an absolute ton of power. Your fundraising capability is incredible.
Wow.
And so you can, chances are if a speaker doesn't want something to happen, it's not happening, right?
Really?
Like it is. Oh yeah.
So that's how much Nancy Pelosi, how much power Nancy Pelosi had. That's how much power people like McCarthy had. They could.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Now the only time that gets a little bit, that teeters a little bit, is if you don't have a clear majority. So if like 3 or 4 people can, vote differently, and now all of a sudden you can't get control. But typically that's what the committee process also gets used for, right? They use the committee process. So you'll stack a committee with people that will vote the way you want. And then somebody submits a bill, and all of a sudden you're like, why is my bill on agriculture in the rules committee?
Right.
Because they're going to kill it. Because that's why it's there.
Okay.
Or why did my bill with no fiscal impact get sent to appropriations? Because they're going to kill it, but they want to kill it by saying there's not enough money because they don't want to say no to the policy, but they want to say, it's too expensive to implement.
Okay.
The other thing that happens at the federal level that doesn't happen as much in a state like Virginia, because we have rules that prevent it, is these massive omnibus bills. So one of the things they do in Congress is they don't have like a one subject per bill. Like in Virginia, if you have a Save the Puppies bill and it's hey, we're going to save the puppies, plus we're going to build a nuclear power plant in my district. No, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
But on the federal level,
crap all the time on the federal level.
Yeah.
Because what they like to do is they like to take all the unpopular things, or the things that might get your constituents to ask you questions, and they load it up into a bill that ostensibly deals with something else. And then when you vote no, like when you grab whatever you need to grab and say, hey, this is wrong, I'm not doing it. Like you pull a Thomas Massey and you say, I'm not doing this crap.
Right.
What they do is they come and they say, oh my gosh, you voted against the Save the Puppies
and
bill.
You didn't even see it.
Why
is that what a pork barrel bill is?
What's that?
Is that a pork barrel bill? Is that what they call a pork barrel bill?
So pork spending used to be where now they've actually cut back. They actually changed the rules a while back up in Congress where it's not to say that there isn't excessive government spending, but they used to have they could used to just load money onto bills that had nothing to do with the expenditures. And they've since cut out, they've put processes in place to reduce the pork. But the ways that people get around it is, one, you can still load up a lot of policy on a bill that has nothing to do with. The other thing that they do is that they will pass a bill like, this is going to be the Clean Air Act, right? And the way we're going to pass the Clean Air Act is we're going to write into law that the Environmental Protection Agency shall promulgate regulations to achieve clean air, right? Well, what did you just do? You just basically gave an executive branch agency the ability to legislate because now they're the ones writing the rules and the regulations. Okay. And they're doing it with the authority of, well, no, we're not doing this. Congress told us to do this. Well, but now they're writing, this is how you get a situation where like OSHA, under the Biden administration comes in and essentially says, hey, if you've got a job or if you've got a company with more than 100 employees and you don't force them to get vaccinated, you got to fire them all.
Wow.
Right. They tried to do that through OSHA regulate. That was
what is OSHA? Bill. What is OSHA?
That's the what is it? Office of basically OSHA. I forget the acronym, but what OSHA does is it manages regulations for like building site safety and occupational safety.
And they tried to enforce vaccination under that. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. So they tried to use an
and they didn't get away with that though. Nick, you just froze.
Famous to include ours here in Virginia. Oh, you got me now?
Yeah, you just froze. Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. So a bunch of state attorney generals came together and said, if you try to implement this, we're going to sue you.
Okay.
We're going to take this to the Supreme Court because you're operating way outside of your authority.
Every time I hear this stuff, Nick, it's like, what a genius people like Thomas Madison were and John Jay and all our founding fathers. God, it's incredible.
Oh, yeah. Well, and a big part of this is one of the things I always do whenever we have a rule in my office, right? Because we get invited to go to speak to various groups and organizations and whatnot. And one of the rules we have is if we're ever invited by a student organization, they get priority. We're gonna talk to students first. And I was sitting there, I was talking with this one very intelligent young woman, very left wing, but just had her stuff together, knew what she wanted to do, the whole deal. And she's asking me about environmental policy. And she's saying, well, what do we do? What do we do to save the environment, to, stop climate change and all that thing? I said, well, look, if this is something that you're really passionate about, I would really encourage you to either get the sort of degree or go into the sort of business that would actually make like solar panels far more efficient or wind power far more efficient. If you could find a way to make these technologies more efficient, more effective, more cost effective, you would actually get more use out of them. Because right now, one of the biggest problems is that they're just horribly expensive and inefficient compared to fossil fuels. So if that's your issue, I would really recommend going into that field. And she goes, no. I want to know what laws we can pass. Yeah. And I said, oh,
what do you want to enforce? What kind of behavior do you want to enforce?
I thought I heard you say you wanted to save the environment. I didn't realize what you really want to do is punish people for non-compliance.
That's
okay.
Right.
Well, that's cool. We got a whole array of things that we can do there. We can take their money. We can take their property. We can put them in jail. We can take their kids away. You want to take their kids away? Like we can do all kinds of stuff to punish people for not. And she looks at me horrified. And she goes, I don't want to hurt anybody. And I said, well, I don't know what they've taught you about government. But what makes us unique is we're the organization that gets to use force.
God,
that's
so
what we do.
I was thinking about that. When you pass a law, you raise taxes. What you're doing is those are both coercive measures. If you don't do those things, if you truly refuse, they will show up. Somebody's going to show up at your door with guns. And eventually you have to do it. That's a very, very important thing to keep in mind, that no matter what, you do need government. But it should always be treated like a necessary evil, not your big brother friend, and that is hugely important.
No, and when this is another issue too, I think when I hear people all the time use the word democracy as if it's synonymous with freedom. And it's like, no, I look, I think democratic processes are very necessary for a free society, but they don't equal a free society. You can definitely have the tyranny of the majority. A free society is one where, generally speaking, people are free to make their own decisions for how they want to live their life, what they want to drive, where they want to live, what they want to eat, what they want to do with their free time. That's what makes you free. It's not getting to vote for politicians every
let me even clarify that even more. I think that the fundamental difference is, and what makes us different as a country, the United States, and we have to preserve at all costs, is that the individual cannot be subservient to the collective.
No.
And that is a very, very important thing. And this is what you just said, is your individual liberty, your right to speak your mind, your right to the fruits of your own risk-taking, your own ingenuity, all these things. That cannot be second place to the collective will, which is
because it begs the question: what's the collective made up of?
Yeah, it's
individuals.
Yeah, people in power, cabals who have their own ideology,
right?
Who will
so
push.
It's like if it doesn't start with individual liberty and individual rights, how in the hell do you get to group rights? Right?
Yes.
You can't do it.
Right.
And it's amazing too, because there's also this big push for like positive rights. Like there's only one type of right.
There's positive rights. Tell me about that. What do you mean positive?
Okay,
rights?
so basically rights get broken down into two categories: negative rights and positive rights. The problem is this, right? Positive rights can't really be rights in the way that we typically think of them. A negative right is something like freedom of speech, right? So it's not as if there's a limited amount of speech out there, and like if you're using some, I can't use it, right? Or freedom of religion. It's not like freedom of religion means the government provides you with religion. It just means that you are free to. Generally speaking, negative rights are things that don't impose any sort of. It doesn't take from somebody else. It doesn't take from somebody else's labor. It doesn't take any other people's property. It's essentially a prohibition on someone interfering with you doing something, and specifically the government interfering with you doing something. So when we say freedom of the press, we don't mean that the government is obligated to give you a newspaper, right? We just mean that if you engage in writing articles, you are free to do so, and you are free to do so without interference from the government coming in and restricting what you say or how you say it.
Right.
That's a negative right.
Right.
Positive rights are when people say things like, healthcare is a human right. No.
Yeah.
No, because healthcare is a commodity or a service.
Somebody's got to pay for it.
It's the MRI machine. It's the hospital. It's the ambulance, right? These are the commodities. The services. It's the surgery. It's the consultation. It's whatever it is. Those are goods and services. Goods and services have to be created or provided by somebody. So the moment you say, I have a right to that thing, what you're telling them is you have an obligation to provide it to me regardless of my ability to transact for it.
That's right.
Now it's perfectly fine to say that you should have a right to go out and seek healthcare. It's perfectly fine to say that we would like a situation where everybody can have access to healthcare. But the moment you say I have a right to a commodity or a service, you're saying I have the right to the fruits of somebody else's labor. And last time I checked, we kind of fought a war over that. Right? You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And people will look at it as, well, this is all semantics. No, it's very, very important,
it's
because if you don't properly recognize that principle, it will lead politicians to start telling people that they have rights to things that they can only get if they take it from somebody else.
Do you find that a lot of people, a lot of legislatures and people are intellectually lazy? Because you're the farthest thing from that. You really understand the meaningful difference between things. And you've done a lot of work on that. You've educated yourself on how government works, on the intellectual architecture that gave us this incredible democracy, with all its warts and all its problems and shortfalls. But for the most part, you understand, you really do understand and have defined for yourself the lines upon which you're willing to fight and defend. And I think that's so crucial. Do you find that is sorely lacking? Are you always disappointed with how intellectually lazy, or is it more that they understand the difference? They're just ideologues.
So here's what I'll say. 10 years ago, so next year will be my 10th year in the legislature. So
Nick Freitas for president. How do you say your last
gosh,
name? Freitas, right?
you can't make me, man. You can't make me.
Dude, you'd be great. But keep going.
9 years ago, if you would have asked me, I would have said, look, it's not like we have a bunch of like stupid, greedy, mean, maleficent people, right? It's just people have different ideas about what the government should do. And I'm in the minority, right? I think the government should be doing very, very few things. I think those things should be properly articulated and laid out so that they're not constantly trying to do other things. And this is something that, I mean, there's a great book called The Law by Frederick Bastiat, and he talks a little bit about this. Just because I don't want the government to do something doesn't mean I don't want the thing done, right? Like I want people to grow wheat. I don't want the government to grow wheat because they suck at it. They screw it up. They don't do it well because you're going to an entity that doesn't have any special, training or proper incentives to do that effectively. So don't give it to them, right? I don't go to the dentist to get my car fixed, right? And for me and if I did go to the dentist to get my car fixed and he refused to fix it or he screwed it up, and I came to the conclusion that the problem is I had a crappy dentist, right? That would be insane, right? That'd be stupid. It's like, no, I went to the wrong entity to solve the problem. So I believe that there's relatively few things the government should be trying to solve, and everything else you leave it to free people working in voluntary cooperation. That is not the common view of government. We are way, 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 way past that. Most people have this idea because they've been told over and over again. And quite frankly, I think the government-run school system has reinforced this narrative. Because when almost your entire education system is heavily dependent upon government administration or government subsidy, then obviously you're going to have an education system that props up government. And so I think people just come to the conclusion, well, of course government provides my education, and of course government should be helping me with my healthcare, and of course government should be, helping me with my housing, and of course government should be helping me with, getting food. And of course, when I don't see it that way, not because I don't want you to have healthcare, not because I don't want you to have food, not because I don't want you to have education, but because I don't think they're very good.
They're not as good as the free market is. But put your
and not only are they not as good, but there's a power structure involved with government providing those services, which inevitably leads to manipulation, corruption. Yeah. And that's what I'm worried about. And that's what I think the founders are worried about.
Put your tinfoil hat on for me for a second, because it does feel as though there is, when you look at these protesters, these college protesters, they don't really know. Then when they ask them what intifada means, what Hamas, what their charter is, what river, what sea, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Now, maybe this is just little sound bites that I'm watching on Instagram, but they just don't know. Having lived in the Middle East for 8 years of my life and all, I'm pretty intimately acquainted with the struggle. And the origins of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but they just don't. And yet they're out there screaming for a free Palestine and stuff. They never mention Hamas. They never mention how many Palestinians Hamas kills. They never mentioned that Hamas actually hijacks those food trucks. They never mention anything about the hostages, the rape of the hostages, and all these things. But that's okay. They're young and they're a little bit moronic and certainly being used. But you get the sense, Nick, that a lot of these people are being funded, organized, motivated, and even given scripts by someone else who's a lot smarter, a lot more nefarious, a lot more powerful, and a lot more clandestine. Is that just me thinking Hollywood here? Is this just cloak and dagger stuff? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. You hear a lot about George Soros. You hear a lot about these different organizations. Maybe it's just organizations that have a different ideological point of view on the world, and maybe that's the case. I don't know. But something's going on. Something went on in our education system. Something went on where anybody who was a right of center thinker and scholar was pushed out of the humanities. And this was taken over by a bunch of people that are very hard for me to understand.
So I think there's two things. I mean, a lot of conservatives will bring up like Yuri Bezmenov. So Yuri Bezmenov had worked kind of in media and worked in correlation with the KGB during the Soviet Union. And part of his job was kind of influencing Western opinion of what was going on in the Soviet Union. And they had these things called active measures, right? And these were things that they attempted to use in order to foster A favorable view of the Soviet
Useful
Union,
idiots.
and an unfavorable view of the United States. Now, let's be intellectually honest, right? The United States was also trying to influence other countries to be favorable to the United States and not favorable to Marxism, right? And I think what Yuri Bezmenov will tell you is that the Soviet Union and Marxists in general had active programs that they were trying to do to infiltrate places like academia, arts and entertainment, labor unions, and things of that nature, to varying degrees of success in various countries. The other thing I think here's what I would caution people. I think it becomes really easy to look at this as there's a Bond villain somewhere, right? Like this is Dr. No that's doing, especially when guys like Klaus Schwab dress like a freaking Bond villain. Like, dude, anyways. Do I believe that at different points in history, countries have tried to influence the West and the United States, and that they tried to influence culturally shaping institutions to do so? Yes, of course. We know they did. They talk about doing it. Do I think that explains everything? No. Do I think there's large organizations like the World Economic Forum where they have a particular worldview that they're trying to push? Yeah, they do. They talk about it, right? Like they wrote the book Great Reset. We didn't write it for them, right? They did this. This is not a conspiracy theory. The other thing that I think is interesting is that none of these ideas, though, would take hold if it was just a couple of bad guys throwing money around or a couple of governments that were trying to infiltrate institutions. Part of the reason why these ideas take hold, and they're largely rooted in what you would call Marxist theory. That doesn't mean they're all like Karl Marx communists, but Marxist theory and critical theory. Critical theory is where you get the oppressor-oppressed dynamic. Those ideas appeal to people on a basic fundamental
good guy,
level.
bad guy, black and white.
Yeah, if you look around and this person has more and this person has less, and I like this person, or I have less and that person has more, and why should that person have a yacht when I'm struggling to pay the rent? Right? That's a very real practical problem. And if you are willing to galvanize that, then, and that's what Marx did, right? Marx galvanized this idea of the laborer is being exploited to the benefit of the bourgeoisie, right? Mm-hmm. And Thomas Sowell, who's one of my favorite economists, he was a Marxist when he was younger, right? It was later in life that he became more of a free market guy. And by later, I mean like his, in 30s. But the important thing is that there's a fundamental need that is being is purported to be addressed by these theories. Now, the guy that I think explains the most about what has happened in the West was a guy named Antonio Gramsci. So Antonio Gramsci was a socialist in Italy. He was put in prison by Mussolini. And one of the things that Gramsci wrote about was he said, Karl Marx was right about the overall sort of society that we want, but he was wrong about the way we were going to get it, because Marx focused exclusively on or predominantly on the economic side of things, that everything was class struggle. And what Gramsci said was, well, no, that's not accurate, because if this is all about economics, capitalism actually does a pretty good job of making people wealthy, to include poorer people. And there was a reason why that the places that were adopting communism were not established capitalist countries. It was places like the Soviet Union, which was, a serf country, right?
Yeah, the czar and the aristocracy owned everything, and
yeah, exactly. And the aristocracy wasn't operating as a capitalist country, right? It was more of it was a cronyist system. And so what Gramsci said is that the reason why Marxism has been failing in so many places in the West is because we've looked at it as just economic, when we have to look at it as a broader social argument. And what came out of that, and he didn't coin this term, but what came out of that was what was known as the march through the institutions, where Gramsci laid out this strategy where he said, you can't just make an economic argument. You have to create a counter culture to the culture that's created within capitalism.
You got to win the narrative, right? You got to win the narrative in a way.
And the way to do that is that you have to look at what are the culturally shaping institutions: media, arts and entertainment, academia.
Not just academia. We should also say that it's also children. You get into kindergarten.
Education and
you get in early. I see this with my own children.
Yeah, Marx was very hostile toward the notion of the traditional family, right? Yeah. He thought that the state should play a much larger role, not just in the education of children, but the overall raising of children.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And so Gramsci articulated a lot of this. Herbert Marcuse, who was from the Frankfurt School in Germany, he really laid out a lot of the groundwork for what we think of critical theory and the oppressor versus the oppressed.
Yeah, Marcuse is considered like one of the fathers of liberal thought, right? I mean, sort of the founding, at least modern liberal thought. I don't know.
We got to make a distinction between what we would call classical liberalism, which falls more into like your John Locke's and your Montesquieu's.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about he was more sort of a socialist thinker, wasn't he? I mean,
yes. He was definitely he was critical of some things with Marx, but at heart, at a fundamental level, he thought Marx got a lot of things right about explaining society. It was just a question of implementation. But then you also had guys like Jean-Paul Sartre, right, who is a French existentialist. You have people like Michel Foucault and Lyotard, who were French postmodernists. You have Simone Beauvoir,
Jacques Derrida.
Derrida, deconstructionism,
Yep.
right? All of that. All of these guys kind of agreed with this underlying theory, not just with Marxism, but there was a great deal of hostility to what we would call like traditional world religions, especially
just the Western logos, the notion of the not binary logos, good and evil, male, female. That's what Derrida was like. If as long as you have a binary way of thinking, you will always favor one over the other. And the way to get rid of all prejudice is have a non-binary view of the world, which is, okay, Jacques, you didn't make the soccer team. You were short and you're an arrogant little prick who never got punched in the face. And you came in there with your terrible, again, there's like his entire philosophy is basically, here is my philosophy or not, or you could erase it with the other hand.
One of the things I loved about there's an element of deconstructions that we can all kind of make sense of, which is to say that when you look at a tradition or a cultural norm, it can be instructive to look at that and say, okay, why did that come into existence, right? Were there good motivations behind it? Were there bad motivations behind it? Right? There's nothing wrong with that. Where deconstruction goes a little bit off the rails in postmodernism is this idea that there is no absolute truth. Well, again, anybody that's took an introductory course to logic knows that the moment you say there is no absolute truth, the first question you should ask is that true? Right? Because that's nonsense.
And what about math? What about math? Math is pretty true. It's pretty exact.
Yeah. I was sitting in a college class and this guy was basically pushing our college professor was talking about deconstructionism and Derrida and whatnot. And it was this whole idea that, the written word is an attempt to impose one's will on the reader. When the only
You've already lost me.
The words.
It's already, I want to throw the guy in a flying headlock when I hear this stuff.
Well, you know what I asked my professor? I said, you know what I find funny about this? Yeah. The fact that I'm reading it. So when this guy wrote this down that said that, the written word is an attempt by the author to impose their will on the reader, does that apply to the guy that wrote this crap? And the professor's like, oh, that's an important point. I'm like, no, that's a catastrophic point.
That's a catastrophic
what this guy is doing. But you know what I also realized though? I'm looking around that college class and I went to college a little bit later in life. I was like 32, right? So I had a wife, 3 kids, a mortgage. I've been to combat twice. Like I'm not here for the college experience. I'm trying to get this crap over with as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But I'm looking around in a classroom with 20 other students in it, and most of them are a lot younger than me. And when they get fed this stuff, they're like, oh wow, that's really interesting. Nope, it's stupid. I'm sorry.
That's right. I always say that. Now at my age, I can talk to a young man and say certain things, and they go, whoa, man. And I'm like, dude, I'm just playing a song that's been playing. I heard this song when I was in my 20s, but I know it's the first time you've heard it. So you're like, that's genius. He just turned a phrase. Like, it's not important to think about. It's not about important what, like, it doesn't matter. What's more important is not what you think about, what you learn not to think about. Whoa, that's so deep. You can, if you know how to talk to a young person, it's very easy to manipulate. I'm going to get you out of here. I love this. I think you're such an important voice. I've told you this, I think, in person. Don't say to me that you would never run for president. I think I put you up against any of these guys and above those guys. You impressed the shit out of me with the fact that you came into contact with objective reality, Green Beret, a combat veteran, You're a family man. You raise your kids. I love that video about putting on your blues, your dress, your uniform to walk your daughter down the aisle. I mean, you're just a man. You're just a man in every sense of the word. When you talk, you make sense. It's like oxygen. And what I really appreciate is the fact that you have spent a lot of time reading and you understand how to defend every single point. So if you're going to debate Nick Freitas, you better pack a fucking lunch. Can you give us, as we take off, can you give us 5, even more, but let's just say 5 books for anybody who's young, who's trying to formulate their political philosophy, their philosophy on life? Give us the books, the seminal books for you that really got you, that brought you here, brought you as this fully realized man.
I mean, look, I'm going to do a shameless plug for the world's bestseller, right? The Bible.
Thank you. Hey,
and people say that,
I'm on my
like,
second time reading it. Yeah.
People say, like, I don't want to read your religious book. It's like, well, listen, there's so much important, not just theology, but philosophy, law, understanding, experience, history, everything in there that's 100%. Really important. And the arguments that are made are incredible, right? Because all of us, I don't care who you are, I don't care where you fall on the political spectrum or any of that, all of us are searching for some idea of love, justice, purpose, meaning. Why are we here? What is the meaning of all of this?
What's a false God? What's a real God? What's worth actually believing in? What's worth not believing in? All those things, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the Bible is incredibly important. I just encourage people to look at it, just kind of pour into that, not with the sense of, I'm just reading a religious text. Yes.
And by the way, the Old Testament and New Testament.
Yeah. You got to read both. Read both. The other, for a basic book on, like an introductory book on political philosophy, I really encourage people to read The Law by Frederick Bastiat. It's only like 75 pages. I mean, it's tiny, but that guy, the reason why he's so good is the way he explains complex things in a way that's very, very accessible is awesome. And he's a smart ass. And I'm going to say this right now. Smart asses are the funniest people to read and to learn from, because they do add that component of humor to it. He's just great. So The Law by Frederick Bastiat, Economics in One Lesson by Hazlitt, is really important, because so much of what we do is centered around economics. It blows my mind when people are talking about, like, what we need is political freedom, like, okay, and economic freedom. Political freedom without economic freedom is kind of meaningless. The economic freedom is every bit as important and necessary.
You want to eat.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. I will say that anything by Thomas Sowell. Anything by Thomas
I always
Sowell.
recommend Black Rednecks and White Liberals, which is a great book.
Oh yeah, that's great. The Vision of the Anointed, A Conflict of Vision, Basic Economics. I mean, all of them are excellent. And again, why do I love Thomas Sowell so much? Thomas Sowell lost his parents early in life, dropped out of high school, joined the Marine Corps, then got accepted to Harvard.
Yep, grew up in Harlem, by the way. Yep.
Yeah, got accepted to Harvard. Was a Marxist. Like, and he was a Marxist studying under Milton Friedman. So it's not as if Thomas Sowell was just like, I'm just a diehard,
Did he study under Milton Friedman? Because I think Friedman taught at the University of Chicago.
He did. Maybe. He went to Harvard and he went to Chicago.
There you go. Yeah.
So he ended up going to Chicago. He ended up studying under Milton Friedman. It's an interesting story. The thing that started to kind of crack his worldview on being a Marxist was actually working for the government in Puerto Rico for 1 year. I think as a student intern with I think it was Department of Ag. I can't remember. But anything by Thomas Sowell is going to be something that I think is very, very worthwhile. I think The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek.
Great book.
That one is critical. And the reason, and this is the part where I just want people to hear me out, because anybody that's been watching up to this point, especially if they don't share my worldview or my politics, is thinking this guy's a jackass, right? Like, I don't like this dude. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Regardless of what you think about me personally, regardless of what you think about my politics or whatnot, I cannot tell you how desperate I am that I want people to be free to live their lives the way they want, provided they don't infringe on the rights of other people to do the same.
That's right.
Right. If you want to make decisions that I would never make, I think it is your right to be able to do that. That is deeply, that's a part of my faith. It's also a part of my political philosophy. What I think is so important about what F.A. Hayek did on The Road to Serfdom is I think he laid out an incredibly good argument on how some ideas which appear to be very altruistic and very rooted in this concept of the common good, end up leading toward the restriction of property rights, individual liberty, and they by necessity lead toward the concentration of power, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, and a whole lot of horrible things happening. And that's one of the most important things that C.S. Lewis has this excellent quote where he essentially says that it's worse to be, it's almost worse to live under a government of moral busybodies, because the person that rules over you for greed or for a lust for power can actually have those things satiated, but the person that torments you for your own good will do so without end because they do it with the approval of their own conscience.
Yeah, it's such a great quote. Yeah.
And so F.A. Hayek's Road to Serfdom is another one that I think is
that's such a great quote by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. So that's 4. I mean, as far as a fifth,
I mean, you can throw C.S. Lewis in there if you wanted. Mere Christianity.
C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, I think, is also in
one of the Tape Letters. I mean, all of it is. I mean, he's just
Mere Christianity was great because I think it's one of the most accessible books for kind of like genuine. The
philosophy behind Christianity, I think, is what he's. Right.
Yeah. If you want to understand, like, okay, why do so many people like, so if you're somebody that believes that this is all flying spaghetti monster and sky daddy, wish fulfillment crap, and you want to understand why is it that some very intelligent people throughout history were absolutely convinced of this, Mere Christianity, I think, does a very good job of
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Yeah.
It seems to endure, and it's important to realize that he was that I believe that was a series of speeches. Or at least excerpts from the things he was on the radio, and he was talking to the UAF. He was talking to the pilots that were flying sorties during World War II, and so many of those pilots in the British Air Force were not making it back. You had such a good chance of dying. And so that really was sort of a practical way of him speaking to these young men, doing their duty, and probably not going to come back. So Mere Christianity is great. We need more of you, my friend, and I want you to keep doing what you're doing. And I know it must feel sometimes like you're fighting a tidal wave, but you're important. You have a much deeper effect on all of us than you think, and this is the good fight, and it's the good fight because you're eminently fair. You stand for freedom, and you know whereof you speak because you've earned your opinion. Your opinions are not based on attitude. They're not based on just emotion. They're based on hard-earned thought and structure and philosophy, and you've put your time in. So you continue to be a leader and an inspiration, and you're funny as shit. So
that means a lot to me coming from you, because
you are, dude.
Like, I always the specials are hysterical, and and your other content as well. And honestly, this is something whereas we just continue this, patting each other on the back portion of the
yeah.
But I really do think that when people, a lot of times people ask me, like, what are we supposed to do? It all just seems so big. It all just seems so. And one of the things I always tell people is, like, look, focus on the things that you can control. Don't ignore the things that are a little bit outside of your control. But if you're focusing on, are you being a good husband and father, right? Are you doing these important things? Like, and then on some of the areas where it comes to being able to engage with people, I honestly think the biggest opportunity that was provided to someone with, like, more in line with our worldview, right, is comedy. Because the absolute assault that has taken place on comedy, like, people need that escape from some of the harsher realities. And one of the things I learned in the military, especially, is you are serving in combat situations and dangerous situations with a bunch of people that look different, come from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic like there's a lot of that in there. And the way we joked with each other, if somebody at the sociology department at Berkeley saw the way that we joked with each other,
they would clutch their chest and faint.
These people are horrible human beings. We would have died for each other.
You're damn right. Damn right.
And so the work, honestly, some of the most effective work that's going on right now in this entire cultural battle that we're watching unfold, whether people want to admit it or not, is in the realm of comedy.
Yeah.
And I think it's where we've made some of the best inroads. So
I appreciate it, buddy. Yeah, my next special is going to be called False Gods. So
nice.
Yeah, I'm excited. You are always welcome back here. And obviously, when you get to LA, I better be your first call. I'll feel it. I'll feel it. When the wheels hit the tarmac, I'll feel it. If you had any decency, you'd bring the family out here and hang by the beach. You're always welcome. We have plenty of room for you here.
No, I appreciate it.
All right, brother.
Same to you and yours.
All right, buddy. Thanks so much. Right. We appreciate you. You're the best. I'll see you guys in Miami. When is this releasing? Next Thursday. So I'll see you guys in Nashville, Tennessee, June 14, 15, 16. God bless.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Take care, brother.
You're the best, brother.